Well, welcome back to the Ask podcast. And we're here again with Gerald Bray, and we're here again with this book, The History of Christianity in Britain and Ireland. And as I suspected last week, we only discussed about 10% of what I'd love to have discussed. But I do want to go on to the last bits, Gerald, because you bring this all up today and you give your opinions, backed up, I think, by the history of where we are. Can I just ask you basically, why did you do that? Why didn't you kind of stop with, let's say, at the end of the Second World War or maybe the 1960s? Why did you bring it right up to the 21st century?
Well, I brought it up to the 21st century because one of the reasons why I wrote the book in the first place was to try to stir up people to realize that the country is in danger of losing its Christian heritage. And this has been the case very much in the last generation. I mean, I was ordained in 1978, so more or less at the beginning of the last chapter. I've taken about 1980. And during the course of my life, my active life, I have watched as the Christian legacy, which we have as a country, has been eroded, derided, ignored in differing degrees, to the point where now it's very much an open question as to where we're going. I mean, nobody really knows. Now, I don't want to be totally negative, but one of the things that I find very irritating about the church and the Christian world today is that everybody wants to be positive. They're always wanting to say, oh, well, we're advancing here and we're growing there and we're doing something else. Whereas what they're really doing, it seems to me, is, of course, publishing endless books, because you can do that now quite cheaply, holding endless meetings, conferences, and so on, forgetting that actually what we're doing is running around in little circles in our own little subculture, and the wider world it pays no attention, or has gone off in a completely different direction. And really what I'm trying to say is, hey guys, look, wake up. You're losing the country. While you're running around holding hands and having fellowship in some conference or other, may be very nice for you. The country as a whole is abandoning everything that you believe, and if you step out of your little bubble, you may suffer the consequences. As one or two people have found out, if they cross boundaries, and to imagine that we can just escape all of this, I think, is very naive. We're getting to the point now where, for example, conversion therapy, there's a danger that this will be banned, by parliamentary legislation. And then, of course, it becomes a question of what do you mean by conversion therapy? And if you mean preaching the gospel, just an evangelistic rally or something like that, you're basically muzzled, you're silenced by something that you thought you could ignore. And I think this is a real danger that we face at every level, because the building blocks of our culture are being transformed or taken away. The whole business of same-sex marriage, of transgenderism, all these things. We may not like them. No one's going to force you or me to change sex. We can stay what we are if we wish. But that's not the issue. The issue is, do we have to accept, and on what basis do we have to accept those who do these things? And if we have to admit them into Christian circles because the law says you have to do this, you can't discriminate against that. And if you do, you're liable to suffer consequences as a result. I think a lot of people wake up one morning and say, well, I never thought I'd go to jail for that. But this is what's happening. And I really felt the Christian community needed a shot in the arm, really. And that's why I wrote it. And I mean, it is provocative, but it's meant to be, so that people will sit up and take notice.
Do you know, this for me is what moves your book from being excellent to brilliant. The last few chapters are worth the price of the book alone, and the last few chapters couldn't exist without the foundation of the history.
No.
But I do think if you'd just given us the foundation of the history and left us to make our own application, it would have been like a sermon which gave great exegesis but didn't apply it to the people. Yeah. What you've done is you've applied it to us, and I found it brilliant. I mean, I've been saying, partly because I agreed with it all. So that was, so obviously you've got to be brilliant, haven't you? Yeah. But no, it's just, you expressed it so well. And, do you know, let me give you an example here. Excuse me. We've got here, I just thought this was a very insightful passage on page 590. With hindsight, we can see that the best way of dealing with the growing sexualization of popular culture would have been to be utterly frank about the false glorification of the human body, the degrading nature of prostitution, and the sad reality of homosexual life. But instead of exposing those things for what they are, the church has allowed themselves to be trapped in a warped sense of morality that obliged them to suppress all discussion of those evils, inevitably making them more attractive as the forbidden fruit that they became. The result, not surprisingly, was that in the end, the whole artificial edifice blew up. Now, I think that's so insightful in so many ways. I used to, when I started off in ministry, I used to be invited to speak on things that cannot be said from the pulpit.
Right.
Which basically meant sex.
Sure.
And if someone would phone me up and they'd give me that title, and I would say, one, what are you talking about? Because I wanted them to say the word. And the other was, why can't it be said from the pulpit? And I think, that's what you're talking about here. And we created this artificial edifice that now has blown up. I mean, is that do you want to expand on that at all? Or is that a fair summary of what you've said?
I think that's right. And the person I got that from, the person who sort of said that to me and inspired me was Mary Whitehouse. Because she came when I was teaching in London and did a seminar and so on. And this is what she said, and her campaign, what was it? I can't remember now what it was called, but you know what I mean.
The Festival of Light.
Yeah. I mean, she said, this is the price we're paying for not, having been honest in the past. And I think this is what we have to do, and just destroy the idol, really.
Yeah, I think so. Can I also say respond to something you said just a little bit earlier about this false optimism? I don't think either of us want to be Jeremiah's or whatever. Although I do, because I thought Jeremiah is actually quite positive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, in the way that that's used. I remember Church of Scotland General Assemblies I would go. I was in the Free Church, and we did the same thing to a lesser degree. You would always have reports and people standing up saying how their church was growing and so on, whilst at the same time the denomination was losing 20,000 members a year.
Yes.
And nobody faced up to the reality of what was happening. And I think what your last chapters here are kind of like a clarion call to face up to both the reality of what's going on, but also the solution that the gospel offers. Is that a fair?
Yeah, that's right.
Assessment?
That's right. I think you can't solve the problem unless you diagnose it properly to begin with. As long as people are going to go around pretending that the problem doesn't exist, it's just going to get worse. Because there's no confronting it. But this is something that now has to happen, I think. And I think more and more people are realizing this. That there's a hollowness in liberal society. And in curious ways, it'd be very interesting to see what the long-term effects of the pandemic will be. I mean, I must say, when I sat down to write this chapter initially, I had no idea how I was going to conclude it. Because as you say, where do you stop? Do I stop with yesterday or what? And then along came the coronavirus, and this was a brilliant way to end, because whatever is going to happen in the future, we know that this pandemic is going to change a great deal. We don't necessarily know yet how or what or where it will all fall out in the end, but it's a major event, a life-changing event for our society, and so I thought, well, this is where this is a brilliant point to end at, and just say, well, where do we go from here? And I tried to say, well, this is the time when we need a serious rethink. That the churches cannot go on in the way that they have done in the past, that new approaches are required. Everybody realizes this. What are we going to do? I mean, this is the time to stop and think about it. And I'm actually encouraged. I don't know, of course, what the truth is, but somebody I've heard say that 1/3 of young people, that's 18 to 30s in the UK, have tuned into church services or religious programs online. Well, they certainly don't darken the door of a church. And you say to yourself, well, what does this mean? Is this potential? I don't say that it's revival. We can't know that yet. But surely here there's something that is changing, and you may remember that just before the lockdown occurred, there was all this argy-bargy about Franklin Graham and whether he should be allowed to carry on his crusades and so on, and that kind of got ploughed under by the lockdown, and now you see, I think people are saying, well, that kind of evangelism, getting everybody into a big auditorium and preaching at them, that might have been fine in the 1950s before people had television and so on. But now with internet and online connection and whatnot, that approach may have had its day. We need to do something different. I mean, I'm not laying down the law on this. I'm not saying that this must happen and it must happen like this. But at least we've got to the point now where people are being forced to rethink. And out of that, who knows? We may see great things. I certainly hope so.
Well, I hope so too. I mean, you're right about, say, that the Franklin Graham thing. At the 1950s, Billy Graham comes, fills Haringey, fills Hampden in Glasgow for 6 weeks in a row.
Right.
2 decades ago, we had Franklin Graham come to McDermott Stadium in Perth, which holds 10,000, and we were struggling to get half that number in, despite a vast amount of money spent for a week. Yeah. So, and I think it would be even worse today. That was 2 decades ago. Can I read you just your own words? The experience of a worldwide pandemic is a reminder of these things, an opportunity for Christians to unmask the materialism and atheism of our time for the deceptions they are. So that's just reinforcing what you've been saying. You see this as an opportunity for the gospel, not the end of it.
Yes, absolutely. And somehow or other, I think maybe it requires this kind of upheaval, for people to go back to basics and just trust in the Lord for the future. And you undoubtedly noticed that when I came to think to myself, what is the most appropriate thing that I can find to conclude the book as a whole? I was driven back to Samuel Rutherford, in prison just before he was supposedly going to be executed, but he died, before that could happen, writing to one of his colleagues and, to encourage him and saying, I know you're alone, but you're not alone because the Lord Jesus is with you. And in his own glorious way, he will shine in the Isle of Britain. And I thought, this may be where we're at. The outward appearance is one of despair, is one of loss, is one of darkness. Nobody knows what's going to happen. And yet the Lord is sovereign. And, we in the church who love to tell God what to do may have to, sit back and listen to the still small voice and take it from there.
Yeah, isn't that the advantage, though, of your book? Because when we look back at the history, we say, hang on a minute, we've been here before.
Yes.
And God worked then. So, you've got the plagues like COVID-19 is trivial compared with the plagues that many of our forefathers did.
Oh, yes.
And yet look what God did in that time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. And, and I think that this is the hope we have. Life on earth is never going to be easy. And I mean, our generation, has been mesmerized by prosperity, affluence. And we've been allowed to think that this is somehow normal. And yet I think back to, my parents or my grandparents who lived through war, who lived through depression, lived through poverty and so on, and who would not be fazed by this. I had to confess that lockdown last year was the first time in my life that I'd really been deprived of what I'd got used to in a serious way. Whereas, I know my parents would be laughing at that. In their youth, queuing up for rationing was normal. They didn't expect the shops to be open.
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll come on to the shops in a minute because I've got another quote I want to ask you about before we finish. But yes, my mother-in-law from the island of Lewis, before she died, I remember her telling me that she was a wonderful, godly woman. She said, when we say grace at meals, people today either don't do it or it's very, superficial. She said, but in the 1930s, when we gave thanks for our food, we really did, because we didn't know where the next meal was coming from.
Exactly.
And was it going to be herring yet again?
Exactly.
So for me, that was a very enlightening conversation to have with her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask you about the fascinating, one of the many things I've highlighted on page 593, despite Mrs. Thatcher's personal faith, secularization made great strides during her premiership. She presided over the loosening of the Sunday trading laws, which was an important step in the de-Christianization of the traditional day of rest. By contrast, Tony Blair's beliefs seem to have influenced his policies, at least to some extent. That's fascinating. Do you want to say anything further about that?
Yeah, I've always been very bothered by the tendency in Christian circles to assume that the Conservative Party is somehow more Christian than Labour. In reality, if you want my true opinion, I don't think either of them is particularly Christian. That they're governed by other considerations. But there are people with Christian beliefs and Christian principles who are working within them in different ways. And I want to be charitable, and I would say, both Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair made a profession of Christianity in some way or other, and spoke about it. They weren't afraid to speak about it on occasion. And just to say, there you have this on the one hand, but then you also have the policies of the government, which are very much harder to read, harder to discern. You can't just say, vote Tory, you're voting for God, and vote Labour, you're voting for the devil. Something like this It's not that simple. Now, I mean, I don't go the other way. I mean, I don't say that, you know, the Labour Party is salvation, and the Tory Party is evil. I don't believe that either. I don't believe that any political party, you know, is the answer. And of course, in a democracy, you're always going to have, you know, some kind of alternation. It's important that you have differences of opinion and so on. And it's important that Christian voices be heard on all sides. I think that's what we need. I'm just trying to sort of say that, you know, don't sell yourself to politics. And I think probably I was influenced there by Donald Trump as much as anything else, you know, trying to co-opt the evangelical world in the United States to his banner, you know, and it was quite obviously wrong. And then you go back and think, well, you know, where has this come from? And in Britain, it's been in the US, of course, you know, you can't get elected to any office without claiming to be Christian in some way or other, and so the whole thing is prostituted. In the UK, that's been very rare. You know, the beliefs of leading statesmen. We haven't really heard much about this over the years. I mean, Gladstone, I think, was the last prime minister who was really known, you know, for his Christian beliefs. You know, odd as they might have been in some ways, he nevertheless, you know, had that commitment. And then Margaret Thatcher really brought it back in a way. You know, I mean, she went and addressed the Church of Scotland and so on, which, you know, how many prime ministers would have done that? I don't criticize her for that. I think, you know, that she did that. That was her beliefs and so on, and that's fine. But let's not put all our eggs in that basket.
Yeah, and you know, that particular quote there, what I was interested in as well, you know, being a good Scottish, well, maybe not Sabbatarian, but Lord's Day person, it's another, you know, you're Anglican, I work for the Anglicans here in Sydney, and it's another Anglican bishop, Bishop Ryle, who said, and I thought it was an extreme statement, but I'm becoming more inclined towards it. He said, a nation that loses the Lord's Day will lose Christianity. And part of what you said there is that, ironically, Mrs. Thatcher, who claimed to be a Christian, helped in the secularization of society, which has helped undermine Christianity. Is that a correct analysis?
Yeah, that's right. And I think because it's the old thing that I start the book in the preface, you know, the quoting some 19th century person, John Bowring, who was the governor of Hong Kong. You know, the gospel of Jesus Christ is free trade. And Margaret Thatcher said something like that. You know, she said something about the gospel is freedom of choice or something like this. And I mean, clearly associating it with, you know, capitalism and that kind of thing. And of course, if you push it down that line, you know, Sunday trading, why not? You know, it's of economic benefit and so on. And from that point of view, and I think that's not right. You know, it's having observed it in my own lifetime and seen the change. I think that we are suffering from it.
Yes, I agree. I think that, you know, our time has gone very, very quickly. I do want to read this paragraph, which, as I went on with the book, I kept, when you get a yes, an exclamation mark, you know, that's a hallelujah in my terms. So the last pages were filled with these. But this one in particular, I thank you for this, because I felt this and didn't really know how to express it. This is what you've said. The belief that Christian doctrine has been determined by obsolete cultural context and must therefore be replaced is one of the greatest intellectual challenges the Church has ever had to face. It is particularly serious when church leaders claim that their novel ideas proceed from the Holy Spirit. How do they know that? The only way we can know the mind of the Holy Spirit is by searching the Scriptures. But if the Scriptures are effectively neutered by a new hermeneutic, what good will that do? The great irony of our time is that although the Bible has never been more readily available in a plethora of translations, ignorance of its contents and message has never been so extensive either. Like Israel in the time of the judges, everyone thinks what is right in his or her own eyes, and there is no recognized authority to put them straight. That is brilliant. I assume you also apply that to the church.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's our biggest problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is very much our biggest problem. Gerard, I really, I mean, I sound so sycophantic. I'm quite a cynic, to be honest, about things. And I'll let you into a wee secret. I started this book, and I honestly did not start off thinking I'm going to really like this. Right. And I got into it more and more and more as I was going on. And by the time it finished, it's let me put it this way. This is me saying it as a Scotsman. If I hadn't been given it as a review copy, I'd be going out to buy one right now.
Oh, that's good to hear.
And I want to encourage people to, you're listening to this, or if you're watching this, I want to encourage people to get this book. You will learn a great deal from it. At times, it is amusing. It is very well written. And for me, spiritually, it's very challenging. So can I thank you, sir, for all your work into this book? It's been so worthwhile.
Thank you very much. It's an evangelistic book, and I hope that people will understand that.
Yes, I think exactly. Anyone interested in the history of the United Kingdom needs to understand the history of Christianity. Mm-hmm. I would give this to my non-Christian friends and say, who are historians or who are interested, and say, you want to understand Britain, read this. Right. And then when they read this, I hope they'll understand the gospel as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the aim of the book.
So, well, God bless you, brother. Great to talk to
Thank you.
And one day, hopefully, we might even see you in Australia again.
Well, I hope so. I was there in, our summer, sort of August of 2019. So if you see all my friends at Moore College and around there, say hello. And, when Australia opens up again, I hope to be able to return.
Yeah, that's where I work, by the way. My office is in Moore College.
Oh, is it? Whereabouts?
Yes. It's right at the corner of the King Street.
I know where. I know the college.
Yeah.
So I say, where in Moore College is it?
It's right at the edge, just as if you were heading down towards the main station. We're on the right. We're at the far end of it. So you'd go past the main entrance and you'd keep going, and then the last building, it's where Philip Jensen is.
Oh, yes,
with his Two Ways ministry.
Right.
We're in there. We have ENC. So anyway, I'm sure any listeners to this as well, you're welcome to visit us too.
Right.
So can I just thank you again, and God bless you, and God bless those who are listening as well.
Thank you so much.